Okay, Jennifer, I don't know if you want to say anything additional or you want me just to go ahead and start now. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yes, please go ahead, Dick.
That's going to be the phrase of the year for sure. Yeah, well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Rubina, for your introductions. I also understand that we're getting tech help behind the scenes from Heather Bailey and Penny Say. Thank you very much to both of you. And we have our own Laura Pinzon behind the scenes. So none of these things come off without some good tech support behind the scenes, as I'm sure you know. So now that you've seen the trailer, Kathy and I would like to go in a little more depth to some of our favorite images and some of the favorite background stories that developed as we put this book together. And as Jennifer mentioned, if you have any comments, please just enter them into the chat or into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And then later on, we'll come back and pick up any questions that you have. And thank you to all of you for joining us. So the first photo that you'll see next on the screen also looks quite a bit like my virtual background you'll see on the screen. This is a shot of Grant Avenue looking north from probably about Pine or California streets. And Grant Avenue, as many of you know, because I understand probably most of you are from the Bay Area and perhaps quite a number from San Francisco itself. Grant Avenue is the central street through Chinatown. It also just happens to be the oldest street in San Francisco. Previously had a different name, but it was the first main street running through San Francisco. So when you see this picture, this is certainly what I think of when I think of historic Chinatown, and probably the first time I saw it in the 70s, in my case, when we lived in the East Bay and would take our young family in to visit the city and would often stop by Chinatown. And I think most of us, and certainly most tourists, would think this is, in fact, the historic Chinatown, that it always looked like this. It's been preserved. But of course, that's not exactly true. You see a couple other shots of what is typical of Chinatown here. In the next one, you'll see some of the facades of the buildings on Grant Avenue. And in fact, we chose those for the cover of the book. This particular building used to house the very well-known restaurant, the Four Seas restaurant. In fact, the sign is still outside there for the Four Seas restaurant. But today, this building actually houses another restaurant called Mr. Jew's, which is the only Michelin-starred restaurant in Chinatown today. Another street image shows you the pagoda-style rooftops and the historic street lamps. Now, I mentioned you might think this is the way Chinatown was from the beginning, and has been preserved since the mid-1800s when it was founded. But actually, when it was founded in the 1850s, it was really what we would probably call a ghetto today. It was low-rise buildings, unsanitary conditions, very low-cost housing, and it was essentially where the immigrants from China were being forced to live together in quite a crowded area. Now, how did that change? Well, of course, all of you know about the 1906 earthquake, if you know anything about San Francisco. And for all the terrible outcomes from that, one positive outcome was that the old ghetto Chinatown actually was destroyed. And first, the city fathers in San Francisco wanted to actually force the residents to move out to Hunters Point or further to the outskirts of the city. But they were able to gather together and negotiate with the city leaders and agree on staying where they were, which is where Chinatown is today, but agreed to have Chinatown rebuilt to be both a tourist attraction as well as a residential community. And that's where the pagoda roofs and the historic street lamps and all of the other flourishes that make it so attractive architecturally came about. Now, so that was in the early 1900s. Now, the immigration continued through the early and into the mid 1900s. And there was a famous act called the Chinese Exclusion Act, passed all the way back in 1882, but which stayed in effect for a number of decades, and also a number of not quite as overt, but equally effective means of discrimination to discourage immigration, to discourage settlement outside of Chinatown, and to limit the job options that the immigrants had. And that persisted in some forms all the way up into the 1950s. And the path to immigration was not made easy. After 1910, everyone who came, immigrated, came through Angel Island. Some of you may have even visited Angel Island, and you still have the buildings through which people came. It was very much like the Ellis Island in New York. So that's where the immigrants came. That's where they were housed, and that's where they were processed. Some were actually sent back. Many did make it, though, however. And while they were housed there, a number of them carved stories, their names, and in this case, a couple of sentences into the wood in the detention centers in Chinese characters. In fact, there is a book that actually documents and translates all of those inscriptions that have been done. But this is one that's in the Chinese Historical Society Museum, and I like to read it just to ask you to reflect on it a minute. Everybody's got a number. I think my number is 80340. They would put your number on the blackboard, and you know that you have to go to interrogation or a health checkup. They didn't use names. On the day they let you go, your number is on the blackboard and it says San Francisco. And note at the bottom, this was carved by an 11-year-old boy in 1939. So it's very poignant, I think, to know that up through that period, how people were being treated. And of course, it has some reminders of some of the things we've gone through more recently with some of the immigration issues. Now, as difficult and as challenging as the first 100 years were in Chinatown, of course, Chinatown did not stop evolving in the 1950s. It continued to evolve into what it is today. And there are two significant statues in Chinatown today that speak much more to much more current contemporary social justice issues. This one is called Goddess of Democracy. It's right in the center of Portsmouth Square. You can see here, you're looking east, so you can see the financial district and the Transamerica building in the background. This is a 10-foot bronze statue, but it is a replica of the 50-foot statue that you may have seen on the news or seen in history photographs of the Tiananmen Square uprising of 1989, where it was a 50-foot wood, cardboard, and paper statue. The other significant statue that speaks to social justice issues is this one. It's called the Comfort Women. And it is a tribute to the young women and girls who were enslaved as sex slaves, prostitutes, for the Japanese soldiers in World War II. And this sculpture has three nationalities represented here to represent the three nationalities who were most affected by that: Chinese, Korean, and Filipino. Okay, Kathy, over to you.
Thanks, Dick. This is James Leong's mural covering 100 years of Chinese in America. And it was criticized by the Chinese for reinforcing stereotypes, even though it was accurate historically. And this rejection hurt the artist so badly, he left America and he spent the remainder of his career in Europe. So this was made of 7 panels, and eventually these panels were lost, and they were later recovered in a Chinatown recreation room where some of the panels were used as a ping pong table. Can you imagine? So today you can see it in its entirety at the Chinese Historical Society of America Museum, where James Leong actually returned to retouch the mural and was welcomed back with honor. In front of the James Leong mural, on the left side is Su Li, and she's an expert in Chinese American history. And what is the significance here? Like a detective, she recovered a set of 12 extremely rare watercolors by the late Jake Lee. And these original works, such as this one, hung in the elegant Khan's restaurant in Chinatown. And after Khan's was sold in the 1990s, the paintings mysteriously disappeared until Sue hunted them all down.
A shared history in Chinatown obviously leads to a shared culture as well. And the biggest cultural event of the year, of course, is the Lunar New Year celebration, which I think Jennifer mentioned in her introduction. It, of course, now is a destination tourism event. It's a week-long celebration capped by the parade and is attended by hundreds of thousands annually, although I'm afraid that this year it's probably not going to happen, or it'll be much scaled down. Very unfortunate. We were fortunate during the project to attend 2 parades and weeks of celebration. This is a shot, actually, again, Jennifer mentioned that the event that I think BNY Mellon was hosting at the Hilton Hotel and on the Kearney Bridge. I was there taking photographs from the Kearney Bridge where this one was taken. And that's where we actually met the people from BNY Mellon, and then later were contacted and decided to do this event. Of course, lions and dragons abound. Also, you have stilt walkers. These 2 young men are actually elementary school students, so I think must be 7th or 8th graders, dressed up in Monkey King costumes. They are stilt walkers. So they traverse that whole mile-long parade route on these stilts about, I don't know, 6 or 7 feet from the ground on up. And also this next one, I think, is this young gal who is also a stilt walker. They're all 3 from West Portal Elementary School, so not in Chinatown itself, but they've been doing this for years, I understand. And I might mention those 2 pictures, the boys and then the young woman here, were taken at the parade pre-staging area. So if you go to the parade and you ever want to get some really good pictures, go an hour early or even an hour and a half, because that's when they start staging on Market Street. And you can walk up and down, talk to the participants, get up close shots. People will pose for you. It's just a great way, because once the parade starts, you're competing with tens of thousands of other people to try to get in a position to get a shot. During the New Year's parade, of course, the New Year sign of the Zodiac is celebrated. This happens to be 2019, I believe, so it's the year of the pig. You can see the little piglets full of candy that are being handed out. And of course, there are other celebrations throughout the year, and another significant one is in this next photo, which is the Moon Festival in the fall. And here you have the moon goddess and her god. The moon goddess is a well-known figure around Chinatown. Her name is Maggie Wong. She's been performing that role for, I think, the last 20 years. She's told me she's ready to retire, but I'll believe it when I see it. She's actually a journalist and a TV personality, and had a TV show for a number of years. But the Moon Festival in the fall is also a wonderful event to attend as well.
Today, if Bruce Lee was alive, if he were still alive, the Kung Fu action hero would be 80 years old. And before he came on the scene in the late 60s and 70s, Chinese males had no role models in the media. They were cast as houseboys or evil emperors, or white people played lead Chinese roles with taped eyes and spoke broken English and stereotypic accents. Now, Bruce Lee changed the life of Jeff Chin, pictured on the left. And when Jeff was a boy, he was picked on because he was Chinese. One night after a particularly difficult day in middle school in Daly City, he looked at the Bruce Lee poster hanging on the wall of his bedroom, and he felt like the action hero was speaking to him, giving him hope. And he told Bruce on that day he would make him proud. Well, since then, he has become one of the world's top collectors of Bruce Lee memorabilia with more than 10,000 items, including the suit that Bruce Lee wore in Enter the Dragon. Portions of his collection have traveled to museums all over the world, including the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And I'm told that his collection will be on display at the Chinese Historical Society of America Museum sometime next year. So keep an eye out for that. Now we move over to Skylawn Memorial Park in San Mateo, and we call it the Ritz-Carlton of cemeteries. Every spring, Taoist priests and families come by the busload during Qingming. It's a holiday that honors dead ancestors. Dick and I were very fortunate to get a tour of the manicured premises with amazing vistas. What a contrast, because in the 1800s, Chinese could not be buried in the same cemeteries as other races, and their bodies were pushed outside of San Francisco.
Kathy mentioned Kung Fu and Bruce Lee, but another tradition that goes back to the martial arts in China is Tai Chi, of course. And we discovered during the book project that there is actually an annual International Tai Chi Day. So we had wanted to include some pictures of people doing Tai Chi in the park or somewhere. So we thought the Kearney Street Bridge would be a great place to do that. So you can see Portsmouth Square in the background. Through the Chinese Culture Center, we let it be known that anyone that wanted to show up on International Tai Chi Day would be offered some free tea and pastries and a free Tai Chi class. So we had a good turnout, as you can see, and we're able to photograph them doing a number of different poses. Everyone had a great time, and we quite enjoyed it. Now, also during the book project, we just happened to run into this woman, Xu Fen Xiao, who is a Sifu or Tai Chi master. And we randomly ran into her because we were taking photos of her husband, who is actually an herbalist that runs an herbalist shop in Waverly Place. And we discovered that she was, in fact, a well-known Tai Chi master. So we asked if we could come back and photograph her around Chinatown, which she was very pleased to do. And we got some great shots of her in front of some of the iconic buildings in the street, and of course here in front of a dragon mural.
Now we're here with the Tong family at the Chinatown Far East Cafe. And this is a red egg and ginger party. And it's for a baby that has turned 1 month old. And you have to have red dyed eggs to represent fertility and a plate of ginger, which represents energy and strength. Now, I think it's the kids who love Chinese New Year the most. You typically give 2 red envelopes filled with 2 fresh bills for double happiness. Typically, when a girl grows up and gets engaged, the bride-to-be will order a custom tailored cheongsam to wear for the wedding. Meanwhile, the wedding tea ceremony is a treasured tradition, but fewer and fewer Chinese couples are honoring it. However, Liana and Michael Tang are the exception. They will present tea to their elders, and in turn, the parents and grandparents, one couple at a time, will offer them money and jewelry as part of the tradition. Now, brides aren't the only ones who receive jewelry. Many times, an older woman will start handing down her heirlooms to her granddaughter, daughter, or daughter-in-law when she feels the time is right. In ancient times, people believed if you wore a gold necklace or jade bracelet, you would be protected from evil spirits. So Chinese jewelry is quite unique because it's not only ornamental, many believe it possesses powers, and it's also been used as money during times of war. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's a scene that depicts everyday Chinatown life. Here, a modern woman passes a traditional tailor shop. She wears a traditional jade bracelet, probably from her mother or grandmother. She carries a bag of good luck oranges and a box of bakery treats for a sweet life. Now, this is my family sharing dim sum with grandma. And this is also known in Cantonese as going to yacha. And it's a very common memory for ABCs like me. Little plates of chicken feet and steamed tripe and gizzards are not exotic. They're everyday dishes. So we encourage you to type in the chat. Tell us what your favorite dim sum dishes are.
As you've probably guessed or already know, there's a very strong sense of community in Chinatown. And you never will sense that any more strongly than if you take a walk across Portsmouth Square. And before COVID, which has limited that somewhat, you would always see half a dozen card games or mahjong games or checker games going on. And one day I was there taking photos, and it was a nice sunny bright day, and everyone was outside playing the games. And then it just started to pour. We got a cloud came over and it just poured. And I thought, well, that's it for the card games. But instead, everybody pulled out their umbrella. Everybody held onto their hand. Nobody turned their cards in, and they just moved over to the shelter of the bridge to Kearney Street, the gate to the bridge there, and continued the card game. But that's really something that is so typical. It's been going on for decades. I don't know how many decades, but many decades, I'm sure. And is just a way that you really get a feeling of the strength of the community. Now, another activity that's very popular on weekend mornings is going to the benevolent associations, the family associations clustered around Portsmouth Square and in that area, where they have Chinese newspaper reading rooms, or they have card games or mahjong games or checkers games going on. This happens to be all men, but there were women and mixed groups as well on the day that we were there taking some photos. Another activity that I think shows the community of Chinatown, or the strength of community, is the Miss Chinatown pageant. And we wanted to understand why there is a Miss Chinatown pageant. And the answer is very simple, and also it's a little bit frightening if you think about it. And that is because for years, young Chinese women and girls were not allowed to participate or were strongly discouraged from participating in Miss America and Miss California and similar pageants like that. So they did what they've done in many cases. They started their own. And now, even though that's happily changed, you still have an annual Miss Chinatown, and it's a Miss Chinatown USA pageant. It's not just San Francisco. It's held here because it is the oldest Chinatown, and it's where it started. But the winner can be from other Chinatowns around North America. This is 2019 Miss Chinatown, Catherine Wu. You saw her in that first picture at a bilingual school where she would go regularly to read and encourage the students to learn both English and Chinese, and help encourage scholarship and academic achievement. But we were absolutely delighted and surprised to find out not only was she a good student, talented, poised, she also was a world-class archer, and in fact was hoping to go to the Olympics that were being held in 2018, or were not held. So unfortunately, she was unable to participate, but we were able to learn more about her athletic skills as well as her other talents. Now, I mentioned Miss Chinatown pageant came out of necessity because the residents of Chinatown were discriminated against. The same is true for the Y. There's a very nice, very successful YMCA in Chinatown today, but its origins go back to, again, the residents of Chinatown being discouraged and discriminated against in terms of using other YMCAs throughout the city. So they founded their own, and now it's a wonderful facility. And the same is true for the Chinese hospital that I think Kathy may have mentioned she was born in, as well as Bruce Lee being born in the Chinese hospital. This happens to be the donor wall for the new Chinese hospital, which has just been in existence for 5 or 6 years, which is a new, modern, wonderful facility now for Chinatown.
In case you're wondering, Chinatown is the densest neighborhood outside of Manhattan. It's only 1/5 of a square mile and houses anywhere between 20 to 30,000 people. So imagine your home is the size of a closet shared by 4 or more people. Welcome to single renter occupancy, or SRO apartments. Here, with no access to washers or dryers, you have to hand wash and hang your clothes outside to dry. You share a restroom and a kitchen with neighbors. One of Chinatown's heroes is Reverend Norman Fong, and he was the former executive director of the Chinatown Community Development Center. So the day this photo was taken, a young lady who lived in the SRO building ran up to him and asked if he would visit her grandmother. Because his grandmother was too sick to walk down the stairs to visit the doctor, because these places have no elevators, right? The family wanted Reverend Fong to come and pray for her. So with compassion and tenderness, he took both her hands in his and whispered a prayer in Chinese. We are very privileged to be able to be there. Today, if you're on the Dragon Boat Racing team from Community Youth Center, all of your gear and your practice time is free of charge. Thanks to CYC, this sport is transforming the lives of at-risk kids who otherwise might be tempted to join the wrong crowd. This young lady, Bella Chen, admits she was really totally unathletic before joining the team. Now she's team captain. Today, many Chinese kids are proud of their heritage. Yuhan Chen, only 6 at the time, picks up a brush for the first time at this Chinese New Year event and finds out she excels at Chinese calligraphy. And I believe it is one of your events that happened last year. Now, Tyler Pham is my nephew, and he samples here dragon beard candy, making a beard of his own. Now, dragon beard candy was originally the dessert of ancient Chinese emperors made from a solid block of syrup and then hand pulled to form thousands of strands. See these colorful buildings here? They're not just ornamental. They belong to family associations, and there's more than 200 of them in Chinatown. Back in the 1800s, if you landed in Chinatown, You would look up your association, which is based on village or your last name. Now, the association would help you secure a job and a place to stay. Many of these associations feature shrines. So note that these associations are private clubhouses, not open to outsiders. So getting in to take pictures for a book such as ours was extremely rare. A play called King of the Yees about family associations came to San Francisco last year. The comedy was written by Lauren Yee, who grew up in Chinatown and spent many years attending association functions. The largest of these family associations is the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association. It's been around since the gold rush. It consists of more than 50,000 members in the United States and Canada, so there's branches throughout. Recently, they worked with officials to block marijuana shops from coming into Chinatown. Now today, the biggest problem facing the associations is future leadership because they're headed by elderly men and most sons are not involved. You may recognize this woman. This is Cecilia Chang, who recently passed away at 100 years old. She was a famous restaurateur who was known as the Julia Child of Chinese cooking. Back in 1968, she opened the very first elegant and successful Chinese restaurant called the Mandarin, and it was based in Ghirardelli Square and not in Chinatown because she was not Cantonese and she was a woman. Because of those two factors, the Chinese there would not rent her space for a restaurant. Now her son, Philip, caught the restaurant bug, and he is the co-founder of P.F. Chang's. Now, back in the 1800s, Chinese schools were erected because parents feared their children would lose their language and culture. Youth learned Cantonese, the language of the Guangdong province, where most Chinese were from. But today, kids are learning Mandarin, the national language of China.
Music and dance also are important in the Chinese culture. And it varies all the way from formal Chinese opera to burlesque to very aerobic lion dances. So this is a shot from a Chinese opera. This young man setting up the props before the opera performance. And I was very lucky to get permission to go in the dressing room and behind the scenes about 3.5 hours before the opera performance, which is when the performers begin to put on their makeup. And it really does take that full 3.5 hours or so to put on all their makeup and all their dress. And you would think that's a long time, but it was really interesting to see step by step how it's done. And I was able to get a lot of photos at all stages of the preparations. And once you've seen that, of course, it makes the final finale performance, finale scene much more impressive when you appreciate what has gone into it. I did ask some of the performers how long it takes to take off the makeup, since it takes about 3 or 3.5 hours to put it on. And they said, well, that's much quicker. We do it in about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we're ready to go. As I mentioned, another form of dance is burlesque. And there's a group called the Grant Avenue Follies, which you see here. These are women in their 70s and 80s. And they put on these elaborate and very entertaining burlesque singing and dancing performances. Now, what you have to know is they were all performers themselves when they were in their 20s. And that's when Chinatown was in the heyday of burlesque performances. And many people came from all around the country to see those elaborate performances. So now these women have been put back together, put on these performances for benefit shows, like veterans organizations and so on, put on a terrific like hour and 15-minute to hour and a half nonstop performance of dancing and singing. And it really is, I think, a tribute to how dance is good to keep you fit and trim well into your 70s and 80s.
Now, moving a 10-pound lion head is also a lot of exercise, and that's real work. You're trying to mimic a real lion. And if you've never practiced, you won't last through an entire parade. This is Corey Chan. We call him the lion head whisperer. For over 40 years, he's been restoring injured lion heads and he gives them back their roar. He's simply self-taught. He replaces eyelid strings used for blinking. He glues on new fur. He paints over scratches until the lion looks just like new. And after repairs, says Corey, the new memories come back to the lion. Aren't these stunning?
So I see in the chat box that we're getting a number of comments about food, which probably reflects the pictures we're showing of food, as well as the fact that we're getting close to the dinner hour. But for most of us, going a visit to Chinatown is not complete unless you do stop for dinner, for dim sum, stop at a bakery shop, or stop to take something home. There's a well-known book, some of you may have even read, called The Woman Who Ate Chinatown, a San Francisco Odyssey. It was written by the late Shirley Fong-Torres, who is, some of you may know her brother, Ben Fong-Torres, a well-known journalist and writer. So most people who frequent Chinatown will have a favorite local restaurant. But as is happening in many areas now, you're also seeing some newer, more upscale restaurants appearing. Now, they may still have roasted ducks, as you see here in the next shot. But it looks a little different. This is China Live, which is in the vanguard of some of the new restaurants in Chinatown, along with Mr. Jew's that I mentioned earlier. China Live was started by George Chen, who's a chef and co-owner with his wife. And it is a large, very open, very clean, very bright restaurant, and just marvelous food. You can see the roasted ducks and even a roasted piglet here. But also, as you go through the kitchen, you'll see some other very modern accoutrements, like you see here, the stainless steel tables and the crew getting ready for dinner. Not what you think of when you think of the back room in a Chinese restaurant, typically. Here you see some giant steamers doing dumplings of various types. And this is my favorite. This is a giant chocolate mousse mixer. So making up a full batch of chocolate mousse for the evening. This is a shot inside Mr. Jew's, which is a restaurant inside the cover photo building. And this is a table setting there. Very precise, intricate, high quality food. And there are other younger chefs as well that are making their mark. This one happens to be Kathy Fang, who's won a number of awards. Her parents are still in the restaurant business in Chinatown. Her restaurant is just outside of Chinatown. It's called Fang's, and she is a marvelous chef as well.
This happy employee works at Mo Li Sheng Qi. It's a business of dried meats and poultry over 100 years old, spanning 7 generations. Yum. Raise your hand if you ever had dried salted fish or ham yu. I love it. When I stayed at my grandmother's house near Chinatown, Papa steamed this with rice for breakfast. And here we have coffee crunch cake. Eastern Bakery is the only one of 2 bakeries making the famous confection in San Francisco. The other is in Japantown. And on Stockton Street, known as the locals' Chinatown, every day at 4 o'clock, the little old ladies emerge from their SRO apartments and they come for produce on sale. Yep man, yep bao, that means $1, one bag. And there's one thing that unites us Chinese through the ages. We all love a good bargain, right? Now, what are these dried roots and fungi used for? Many of you may already know. These are ingredients used in healthy family soup recipes. Take a fistful of this and a fingerful of that. Soup can clear acne, fortify your qi, improve your circulation. A traditional Cantonese mother cooks soup daily for her family. However, and unfortunately, I'm not a traditional Cantonese mother.
We are about 2 minutes away from the Q&A period, so be thinking about what questions you might have or what comments you'd like to offer in the chat room. And a heads up to Richard, because I know he's going to monitor the questions and help us out with that. So we're going to end with some photos of some of the entrepreneurs and owners of the small family businesses that are really the lifeblood of Chinatown's economy. And I don't think anyone that I've run into is more entrepreneurial, harder working, or more determined than this woman, 82-year-old Tane Chen, who founded, owns, and operates the Walk Shop on Grant Avenue. Just a delightful, energetic woman. Even during the COVID shutdown, she's been working 6 or 7 days a week, handling online orders and keeping the business going. But there's quite a variety of businesses. I mentioned an herbalist previously, whose wife was the Tai Chi master. Well, this is the gentleman here who runs the herbalist shop. We also encountered several florist shops. This woman is the owner of her florist shop, a studio photographer who's done photos of many famous people in San Francisco, and I think 3 or 4 presidents who visited Chinatown. Acupuncturist, and again, we got to go behind the scenes with this acupuncturist and his wife to see where they store all of their herbs and also learn about acupuncture and how they use it. And it was just fascinating to get behind the scenes on that. Now, you might ask, why does Chinatown have such a variety of businesses for such a small community, at least geographically small, although it has 25 or 30,000 residents? And it's again because it had to, because the outside services were not always open, readily available, and people were not welcome. Residents were not welcome, maybe had a language barrier as well. So you see Chinatown being very self-sufficient in terms of its services, its shops, its grocery stores, its medicine, and in all aspects. Some of the businesses in Chinatown, of course, cater very especially to tourism, and you saw the tea tasting there, like the jade carving shop here that you see. And similar to the restaurant scene, you're also starting to see some new upscale boutiques start to come in as well. This happens to be Cindy Chen, who is George Chen's wife, and who is the manager and really the founder of the gift shop at China Live. She traveled all around the world, especially in China and Asia, but in Europe as well, locating what she thought was some of the best quality products, best design, and has brought all of that to the gift shop at China Live. And it's just a wonderful gift shop. So great place if you're able to access it with the COVID restrictions, great place to do some Christmas shopping for sure. Here's another upscale store, which is actually in the business of selling silk garments like kimonos. The name is actually Kim plus Ono, which is a play on the word kimono. And here you see some of their goods on the racks, hand printed silk blouses, dresses, kimonos. And this young woman was participating in a Crazy Rich Asians lookalike contest that happened to be going on the week of the Moon Festival. So that's why she's dressed like that. So finally, we'll close the narrated slideshow with this image and just explain what it is. It's actually a picture of a mural. It's in a back hallway of a new restaurant called Dim Sum Corner, which is right on California and Grant Avenue. And by the way, is doing takeout during the COVID crisis and is great variety of dim sum. But we really like this mural because here you have a young woman painted in this very contemporary graphic arts design with a modern camera, obviously, looking very contemporary, except for this very traditional red dress. So we just thought it was a perfect blend of the old and the new, and she projects such a confident view here. Taking the picture of you, you're not taking a picture of her. So we thought that was a great representation of just Chinatown going forward, confident, contemporary, and looking ahead to the future. So Richard, with that, hopefully you've been monitoring the chat room and may have a question or two for us.
I do. So thank you, Ben and Kathy, and to the 37 or 38 participants on the line, feel free to pepper questions in the Q&A box. And Ben, we'll get to your question in just a minute. But first up, Dick, why Chinatown? What inspired you to create a book that focuses on Chinatown?
Yes, good question, and one that I get asked fairly often. I had done two books prior to Chinatown on San Francisco neighborhoods. I did one in 2014 on Haight-Ashbury, and then I did one in 2017 on the Mission District. I did the Haight-Ashbury book because our daughter and son-in-law have a bookstore in Haight-Ashbury. Some of you may have been there, called the Booksmith. And that's what got me interested in Haight-Ashbury. Plus, I remembered the history from the 60s and the Summer of Love and all of that. So that was the first book. I was encouraged by the fact that people liked it, thought it was very interesting to feature a neighborhood. And so I started looking around for a second neighborhood, and many people suggested the Mission to me because of the Latino culture, the murals, and the fact that it's going through gentrification, all kinds of challenges. It has the immigration issues. Just a very colorful, vibrant, but stressed community with a lot going on. And the Mission book turned out to be very successful. We're in the third printing, actually. And so again, I got a lot of questions about what about another neighborhood? And I was thinking, what would be interesting, what's historic, what's relevant to today? And Chinatown came to mind. Of course, this was all before the COVID crisis, well before that. So we didn't know that that was going to feature in it. But it's a marvelously historical community, as you've said and we've said. It's very resilient. It's faced survival many times. It's facing survival again now. Many of the businesses are, and it's also faced discrimination in many different forms. And I think that's a very relevant subject today. So I looked for first an organizational partner to help me navigate, and that's where the Chinese Culture Center came in. They've been very helpful. And then I started looking for a co-author who could help with the interviews and writing and really carry the load there. And I found Kathy in a New York Times article and asked the Chinese Culture Center to try to find her, which they did. And then that's how we got connected. And it's been just a marvelous partnership. And And she's added a huge amount of perspective and research and depth to the whole book. So it's really made it a more in-depth book than either of my prior two books.
Great, thank you, Dick. And that actually leads into a question for Kathy. Lucy asks, Kathy, what makes Chinatown so different from other Chinatown, San Francisco's Chinatown so different from others around the world in the US? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, what's really amazing, it's kept its footprint through all these years, whereas the other Chinatowns and other places, there were a lot of Chinatowns, so a lot of in the United States, but many of them have disappeared. And I believe in New York, the Chinatown that's there now has been mostly gentrified. There's only like 25% of the population is Chinese there, or it's Asian. So a lot of the places have become art galleries. And so a lot of the Chinatowns have not weathered storms well, but Chinatown has.
And speaking of storms, Kathy, how is Chinatown doing with COVID? Ben mentioned, or Dick mentioned the challenges of COVID and shutdown on the merchants. As a journalist, what are you seeing?
I was just there last week to do my Christmas shopping because I wanted to do most of my Christmas shopping there. And if you go during the weekday, a lot of the stores are closed, especially the souvenir stores, not all of them. But what's interesting is while Grant Avenue, the tourist street, is very quiet, still bustling is Stockton, because that's the neighborhood, that's the local Chinatown. So all the stores are open there, the produce markets, the bakeries, that's still bustling, but it's Grant Avenue that's become very quiet. And on weekends, it opens up more. So I was trying to get some things purchased, but a lot of the shops are closed, and I realized I had to wait until the weekend to go there. But they're hanging in there. I talked to the owner of Eastern Bakery, the photo of the coffee crunch cake, and he's there open every day. He says he's open 7 days a week. He's got people cannot come inside his bakery. So he's got a little table in front, and he's just calling for people to come in and telling them what he has. And I asked him, how have you been able to hang on? And he said, I'm Chinese and we're very frugal. So we save for a rainy day. So because he is so super, super frugal, he hasn't upgraded his place ever. They're able to kind of cover, So the ones that were able to do well during the good days really saved up. They really saved up, and that's what's kind of bridging them right now.
Well, Dick and Kathy, like you say in the foreword to your book, a beautiful example of resilience, survival, and celebration in our own backyard. To all those that had questions, they're coming in fast and furious, but we want to be respectful of your time. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to my colleague, Jennifer Ma, who will close this out. Jennifer?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dick and Kathy, for such a wonderful behind-the-scenes discussion of your book. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us this evening. For those of you who have not received the book yet, we will forward it later this week. If you did not provide your address when you register for the event, please email it to your Baker Tilly or BNY Mellon contact, and we'll get it out to you. We now want to highlight our next joint event with Baker Tilly that is currently slated for February next year. The topic may be of interest to many of you or your network. So moving cash in and out of China through transfer pricing requires detailed expertise, but it's doable. By clearly defining and implementing a transfer pricing model, multinationals can charge Chinese subsidiaries for beneficial services performed on their behalf and for the use of intellectual property. These mechanics help to facilitate the movement of cash between the US and China. So please join us for a conversation with Baker Tilly's US-based transfer pricing expert and our BNY colleagues in Hong Kong to learn about transfer pricing and how it may be leveraged within your firm. We'll send out more information in January. Again, thank you for everyone joining us tonight, and have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.